for the universe's history.
Yeah. White magic, then. We're finishing up Rule 2. Rule 2 is, when the shadow hath responded meditation deep, the work proceedeth. The lower light is thrown upward, the greater light illuminates the three, and the work of the four proceedeth. So we moved along with that, and we've just about finished, had some interesting details to talk about. But we'll just end up, finish the Tibetan's comments. He talks about the first great work of the solar angel in relation to humanity was to send a portion of itself into the bodies of humans. Now this first happened, DK says, 18 million years ago. Now science has traced humans back, just wasn't that long ago. It was less than 1 million years. Now they've got us traced back, found remains up to 4 million years, and they keep going back farther in time. And I suspect one of these days they'll go back 18 million years, because that's that's when the great event of self-consciousness first materialized in the human race that we have here. Whether or not there was a human race before that, he doesn't say. It's possible there was, according to some teachings in the Hindu religion, there's been cataclysmic events that has completely wiped out humanity a couple times, even previous to that. But we don't have any reliable details on that. But there are some archaeological digs that have produced artifacts that are dated for, one I come across was dated over 1 billion years old. So, and it looked like there are a bunch of ball bearing type objects with grooves in that are dated over 1 billion years old that really look man-made. And so so that's interesting. So how ancient we are is not settled, but he does tell us that the current human race as it is now began 18 million years ago. And at that time, what happened is the solar angels, which are now one with our own soul, the solar angels, which are entities that have evolved from a previous solar system, and they became masters and then became almost as gods and one with God. And the reason they're called solar angels is they actually came from the sun, and they are of a much higher vibration than us here. And the solar angels came to the earth, and they threw out a portion of themselves into lower man. And I didn't realize how the Tibetan taught this about putting forth a portion of themselves until I read the books by Michael Newton, where he progressed people between lives. And he took over 3,000 people back through regression to experiences and that they had between lives, and retrieved quite a bit of information. And what was interesting about it was everything he retrieved from one person was in harmony with what others said. They all said basically the same thing. And one of the things that they said was that the soul projects a portion of itself, just like the Tibetan says here, into a human body when we're born. He says the amount will vary depending on the mission that you have. If you have a really important mission, your soul may project a larger portion. He says the average is about 25% of its essential life force will be projected into you. So if you're like an average person, you're only 25% here, and you're 75% in the upper realms. You're just not conscious here of that 75% there. But what the goal is to unite the part that's in the soul with the part that's in the body, so you can function as one. And that's the purpose of our evolution over a long period of time. So he says the average is about 25%. If you got something really important to accomplish, you may project like 33 or up to 40%, usually not over 40% of yourself. And then he says if you get behind in your evolution, maybe you screwed up a life or something, you may make two projections, have 25% in an entity in England and 25% in an entity in the United States, and live two lives at one time. But each life won't be conscious of the other. But Monroe, where he talks about his out-of-body experiences, talked about when he's out of body, he met some type of master who told him, yeah, he says, you have another one of you in another part of the world. He says, would you like to know who it is so you could see him, meet him? It made him kind of nervous, and he says, no, I don't think so. So that would be kind of nerve-wracking to meet yourself in another body in another place. You would wonder, well, maybe he's totally screwed up his life, and that's going to affect me when I return to my soul. So anyway, yeah, it'd be funny if one projection really made turned into a decent person, the other person turned into serial killer or something. That would be, I wonder if that's ever happened. He never mentioned that, but he says two is 3 would be the limit. Three projections may happen rarely, but and 2 doesn't happen that often. Usually the soul just projects one person at a time. But so anyway, this projection, he says the solar angels projected a portion of themselves into humanity, and that began self-conscious humanity 18 million years ago. And we've been moving along gradually ever since that time. And now we're kind of going on a parabolic curve where we're going upward quite quickly, and we're approaching a new scenario that's equivalent. He says it's equivalent to the great event when we established self-consciousness. We established self-consciousness 18 million years ago, and now he says we're approaching a time where we're going to establish group consciousness. And establishing group consciousness, we will enter into the kingdom of God. And when we do this, he says, intelligent activity and love wisdom must be united, and the union must take place on the physical plane. In order to do this, the soul is entering into meditation deep, the union with all other souls who may have brought forth their instrument into a responsive state, in union with. Okay, then he says, the sons of God will triumph on the earth in full incarnation, in full incarnated expression, and will bring forth the light and therefore life to all manifested forms. This is the life more abundant of which the Christ speaks. Okay, the life more abundant, that's more than just getting a nice home, nice car, and everything like that. But the life more abundant is the life that's fed to us from the soul. The great goal is to unite with the soul so that the soul and the person is one. Now, your higher self is composed right now of the solar angel and your soul essence. Your solar angel is like your mother in heaven, so to speak. Your monad, which is the higher self of the soul, is like your father in heaven. And so your nourishing soul or solar angel is nourishing your soul until you become one with it. When you become one with it, then the solar angel goes back home and you are united with your soul essence because you have become like the solar angel. You have absorbed its intelligence and essence, and it is the true birth. The true birth of you as an independent soul happens when you enter the kingdom of God, and then you are a soul essence on your own. You are a newly born, complete soul, so to speak. You're an infant soul before then, but when you enter the kingdom of God, you become a complete soul. So you had two great events: the event of establishing self-consciousness as a human being through the help of your solar angel, and then establishing soul consciousness is a second great event. And this great event is going to happen over the next 1,000 years or so if we were able to establish peace, because nothing is written in stone. We could still screw this situation up with a great world war that would take us back to the Stone Age. But if we can escape that and solve our problems and move ahead, we will enter into, many people upon the earth will enter into the kingdom of God. Okay, any comments or questions before we move ahead?
You had mentioned, go ahead, Rick.
It says that this collective group consciousness was going to take place in the physical.
Yeah.
And from my observations in virtual worlds, there are situations, particularly this circle dance we do on Sunday nights, that seem to produce a group consciousness that I can sense. And I tell all my friends, you got to try this circle dance because like it develops your telepathy.
Yeah, there's a lot of training wheels for group consciousness. Even in a business, business leaders get together and they talk about how to improve things, and that's the beginning of a group consciousness. Church leaders get together and they plan and discuss. They participate in group consciousness, and even having fun like you're talking about, that's participating in group consciousness. All these things are great training for humanity to prepare for two great events. One is the individuals being united with their own soul. When you're united with your soul, as he tells us, he says, you'll really never feel alone again, because you will be aware of that you're a part of something greater, and so you never really feel completely alone, unless all of a sudden your consciousness is reverted back to like too much on the cares of the world and the concerns of the world. And when this happens, then you might go through another dark night, or where you're feeling all alone and neglected and everything. But normally, once the person is solid in the soul, he will be aware of a group consciousness. The second thing is people on the physical plane having soul consciousness together. And all these groups that we hear about, where they do have a connection, where they sense each other and they produce an energy, which is a group type of energy. But then what we're looking for in the molecule, and this is kind of, when I read stuff like this from the Tibetan, it sounds like he understands the molecule and is kind of hinting at it. He never talks about it directly, but he often will hint at the type of group consciousness that the molecules will have. But in the actual molecule, the group consciousness will be so high that a higher entity will actually incarnate into it. It could be a group entity. It could be the Tibetan hinted that this could be the way the hierarchy will return to the earth will be through a group consciousness, he once said. And we covered that a few weeks ago, and I found that very interesting. So it's possible when the molecule is created that we will be able to tune in to any member of the hierarchy, which would be an interesting thing to do. Okay, any comments or questions before we proceed?
No, I was just going to make the comment that it kind of sounds like that's what he's hinting at here. So you basically just covered that.
It basically sounds like what?
Well, when he's talking about this right here,
Yeah.
it kind of sounds like, you know, what you just talked about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. Right. I think it does. Okay. He ends. Yeah.
Yes, I was raising my hand, but
Okay, I'm sorry.
okay. Okay, I have a question about the soul infused. After your soul infused, then the solar angel leaves, and the solar angel is leaving. He leaves you, and you are on your own, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if after that you decide to incarnate through the birth channel, and so you have to go all over the infancy and the childhood, and you make mistakes and you degraded. Is it possible that a solar angel will have to come watch over you again?
No, this not much of a chance of that. What happens after the solar angel leaves is you and your soul become one. You become like this. You become like the solar angel, because you are now have all the qualities of the solar angel. The solar angel isn't needed, and then but you still have a higher self. This is kind of confusing because the solar angel is often equated with a higher self, and it is with all but a very small handful of people. But when the solar angel leaves, some people think, well, do I still have a higher self? Well, yeah, you do. Your higher self is in your monad, and that's your Father in heaven. And for Jesus, his higher self was not his soul, but his monad, and the monad is symbolic of the Father in heaven. This is why Jesus kept using the term Father in heaven or Father in relation to him rather than mother, because for the soul is like, the solar angel is like your heavenly mother, and your monad is like your heavenly father symbolically. Neither one of them really are male or female as we understand the term. But if we understand it as far as sending and receiving, that's the basic difference between them. Male is connected with sending, and female with receiving. So student, teacher, male, female is divided into or symbolized by all kinds of different terms. But yeah, you will still have a higher self, and you will move along. But the next step is to become one with your monad. And Jesus attained this when he said, "I and my Father are one." He was really saying, "I and my monad are one." And your monad is your originating point for this universe, which point is connected to the life of the one God. Okay, so really when you say I and my monad are one, you're saying the Father and I are one, or God and I are one. It's all the same thing. And so it's quite interesting to contemplate. Okay, any other comments or questions? DK ends this rule with this quote, and I'll just read it because it's good. He says, I, who have entered somewhat into an understanding of the life of the solar angel, seek to assure my fellow pilgrims that the passing things of the senses are but trivial and of no value compared to the rewards here and in this life to the man who seeks to merge his everyday consciousness with that of his own soul. He enters then into the community of souls and stands not alone. The only lonely periods are the result of wrong orientation and the holding on to that which hides the vision, and fills his hands so full that they cannot grasp what has been called the jewel in the lotus. So, long as we concentrate and put our attention in the right place, he says, the lonely periods will just be the result of wrong orientation. So we just want to make sure we're oriented in the right direction, and then we will feel positive. I know in my life, when I thought I made the right decision sometimes, it just didn't feel right. It felt like I was going against the current. And when I sat back and thought, my soul was trying to give me a message, hey, you are going against the current, even though that decision seemed right, it's not the direction you're supposed to go. Then when I finally changed the direction and got it, my direction correct, it just felt right. And my soul said to me, good, you're going in the right direction. I could just feel it, you know. And this is important that each one of us do this. So we have what he calls here the right orientation. And once we have the right orientation, we'll feel like we have the wind at our back. But the weird part of it is sometimes when you're going in the direction the soul pushes you, it will, your mind will say, this doesn't seem totally logical. It seems like you should be doing something else. But consider this, the soul, your higher self, sees from a higher angle of vision, and it's like the parent and child. The parent says to the child, no, you can't have 6 candy bars for dinner, you know. You just can't do it. And the kid thinks, well, why can't I? It tastes good. The kid doesn't understand, and this same thing between us and our higher self. With true communication, you'll receive impulses and instruction to go in a direction you wouldn't have chosen just using your normal thinking abilities. So always keep that in mind. Okay, we'll move on to Rule 3. Rule 3 reads, the energy circulates. The point of light, the product of the labors of the four, waxeth and groweth. The myriads gather round its glowing warmth until its light recedes, its fire grows dim. Then shall the second sound go forth. It's interesting, and if you haven't studied this before, it sounds beautiful, but you probably don't understand the thing it's saying. So hopefully by the time we finish this rule, we will have some understanding of it. He says this about these rules. He says the purpose of these rules is not self-improvement, but to function as an incarnated soul. In other words, the whole idea behind these rules of white magic is to teach us to become one with the soul and then use the intelligence and vision of the soul to manifest wonderful things here upon the earth. Now it's interesting, he says that these are not for self-improvement. And why do you suppose he says that? He says this a number of times that, we pass beyond the point where we're going to emphasize you being like a really good person and that type of thing. What do you suppose he says that? Isn't that what all the teaching should be about, making us better people? Let's see, who shall we pick on? I think I'll pick on Adam again. What do you think about that, Adam?
I'm down with it. One thing that comes to mind is that sometimes if we're overly focused on making corrections in our lower self, I mean, we all know our failures and our shortcomings. If we focus too much on that, then we lose sight of the bigger picture, which is the group work. And I think focusing instead just on putting, doing what you can on a daily basis, having the right intent and making an effort, I think DK says are two of the most important things. So as for the individual, we all have to work those things out. But I think, sometimes putting the focus on the higher, the group work will help us to overcome the lower self and some of the things that we're dealing with.
Okay. Okay, all that's true. Let me add just a little bit here. When you're in school, when you're in kindergarten and you learn like the ABCs, once you learn the ABCs and then you move on to reading, do you go back and relearn the ABCs all over again? What do you think? Do we do that or not? Or do we move on? And so what he's talking about, what he's talking about is the average people, they go to Sunday school and regular schools and they learn what's right and wrong and the basics. And in church, you're told to repent and be loving and kind and don't have too much pride or ego, be humble, respectful, obey the law, obey the rules, obey the 10 Commandments. We learn all these basic things. And what he's pointing out is that once a person goes through this procedure, he reaches a point where he's basically a pretty decent person. Now, nobody's perfect. Most people told a lie or two and once in a while, or maybe stole candy bar when they were young or whatever, But we've all done certain things that are wrong, maybe cussed when you drop an anvil on your foot. But whatever the case, people reach a point where they're basically a decent person trying to do what's right and trying to treat their neighbors right. And there's a lot of people in this category that just do not need to be preached to any longer and are ready for something else, ready for their next step. And so he points out that the disciple reaches a point where he doesn't need all this preaching to anymore about being obedient and kind and loving and everything. He's basically got those basics down, and he doesn't need to put much more attention on. He can now shift his attention to something else. It's like the guy taking Algebra 1. He's taken the first course in algebra and he's got it down. And now he doesn't need to go through it anymore. He doesn't need to be told what X means anymore or whatever. So he moves on to Algebra 2. In Algebra 2, he learns a bunch of concepts that were not in Algebra 1. And then he moves on to something like maybe trigonometry or something like that. And he learns a bunch of new stuff still. Now, we have enough common sense to do this in school, in regular school, but people don't have enough common sense to do it in their regular spiritual life. A lot of people don't, because they keep going back and hearing the basics preached to them again, saying, okay, you need to have faith, and you need to love your neighbor and all this. And he goes back and they listen to this over and over. And it's easy because, they understand it and it reaffirms it, but they're not learning anything new. It's time, once you get the basics down, you get pretty solid character, then it's time to move on to something new. And I'd say everybody in this group you may not be perfect. None of us are perfect. Of course, what is perfection and who's going to define it? But so none of us are perfect, yet I'd say everybody in this group is a decent person, willing to help out others in need according to their ability. They're kind. They have all the basics down that the churches and the religions all preach to us about, that we're supposed to have. All of you guys, from what I know of each person here, you're a decent person doing your best, and you're ready for something else. You're ready to learn something new. So this is why he emphasizes this quite regularly, the importance of the reason that the masters, he says, don't spend a lot of time on character flaws, and because most of us have kind of got the basics down on developing a decent character. The only time DK puts emphasis on character is when he put some on it when he formed several groups through Alice A. Bailey. And if somebody was doing something that was getting in the way of group activity, he may point that out. And the thing that got in the way of group activity more than anything else was when basically people were concerned about the other guy's flaws rather than his own. And that's a really common problem in group work, saying, hey, Jim over there, he's really screwing up and slowing down the whole group. And instead of looking at himself and what he may be doing to slow down the group activity. So this as far as character flaws go, that was the big one that DK had to deal with when he was trying to create his own groups. And he had pretty high expectations, and it didn't live up to his expectations. And he points out that the masters don't know everything that's going to happen because of free will. So establishing a good cohesive group that is capable of soul union is very difficult. DK didn't establish it to his satisfaction. Jesus had Judas betray him and interrupted his group, and he had the disciples had arguments and problems amongst themselves, and so it's always difficult. It was right after the resurrection that the little group back then had their most power and union, and I think it was that great event brought them together in the soul like maybe it's never happened in history. And they had great miracles manifest for a short period of time after that.
You mentioned when we think we're ready for the next step. And from my experience, if you think you're ready for the next step, you better be really sure you are, because as soon as you announce that in your prayers, bang, it's going to hit you hard. The next step's going to come right behind that.
Yeah, right. Well, that could happen. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. If the guy isn't really ready at all, his soul will hold off for his own protection. But if you had that happen before, it meant probably you were ready, even though you didn't feel ready. Yeah. Yeah, it's like we never feel completely ready to take a big surge forward spiritually. It always takes a certain amount of courage. Through the synthesis of the meditation of the soul and the personality, there's a point of occult light on the mental plane becomes a point of physical light in the brain, he says. And he points out that light and matter are synonymous. Now, this is interesting in the fact that the reason he says this, that light and matter are the same thing, is because what we're trying to do is bring the light of the soul, which is not dwelling in physical matter, down to our physical brain, which is in physical matter. And the reason we can have the connecting light link between the two lights is because they're both light. Matter is composed of light. But what is the difference between matter and pure light? What's light
Vibration.
composed of?
Energy.
Yeah,
Vibration.
Alex.
right, it's vibration. Everything is composed of vibration. So the only difference between light and matter is vibration. You have a lot more denser vibration in matter than in light. And because of that denser, slowed down vibration, matter is created. And when we look at matter, we find nothing but pretty much empty space with vibrations in it. And so it's amazing. The farther down they go and appearing into matter, the atoms, the protons, the quarks, so the science has finally come up with a string theory that everything is just little strings in vibration somewhere. So I'm not sure when they came up with that, but it's very much in harmony with what I wrote in the Molecular Relationship clear back in 1978. Okay, so we have the light of the soul is to merge, to connect with the light in the physical body, and it like opens a door so that we can see into the mind of the soul. And he says the thought of the man and the idea of the soul harmonizes, and the germ of the thought form with purpose is created, giving the disciple a partial vision of the plan. Now, this is the most important thing of the soul connection, and the soul itself, your higher self, has a vision of the plan. Every part of every higher self has at least a good portion of the vision, a portion of the vision that we can handle. Not even the masters have the complete vision, but every entity has a piece of the vision, so to speak, until we put the pieces together and then we see a bigger piece of the vision. But when you make soul contact, what you'll wind up doing is participating in the plan. And when you participate in the plan, it's like I say, you will feel the wind at your back. You may be going at the direction that seems like you're not maybe fulfilling a part of any major plan, but you will be. A part of yourself will be, because you will be doing your part in the plan of the whole. Man, he says, is very slow to grasp the idea of the unity from the soul. This can be seen in the attempts to relieve human and animal suffering. So he says, when man itself grasps the unity of the soul, they will be more concerned about suffering throughout the planet. You know, about a third of the planet goes to bed hungry. A lot of people are starving, they're in wars, and the more humanity as a whole becomes connected to the soul, and everybody's connected to a small degree or a great degree. Our goal is to become one with the soul, but everybody feels some soul impulses. And the soul impulse of humanity as a whole is toward people as a whole, thinking, boy, I wish there was something to do to alleviate hunger or starving, or the homeless people, the animals. And speaking of the animals, he says it's the mission of man to be the savior of the world, basically, including the animal kingdom. And what's interesting is man is condemned by a lot of the groups of the world today for being too destructive. We're told by that man is destroying the planet and we're destroying species and all this, but the Tibetan says our destiny is much different than this. Man, humanity is a little bit like, has been a little bit like the kid growing up. You know, when little kids grow up, they do some crazy stuff. They'll take a magnifying glass and burn grasshoppers with it. They'll shoot little birds with BB guns. They'll do destructive things, not thinking of the consequences because they haven't learned the consequences. And humanity has been a little bit like this in its infancy. We have taken much more from the earth than we've given without thinking of the consequences. But now he says, but the destiny of man is much different than this. We're growing up, and as we're growing up and maturing, we will put back to the earth the essentials to make the earth healthy. We will work with the animal kingdom to make sure that they flourish and live a lot better lives. You know, you go out in the wild and watch these elk in the middle of the winter. I mean, they're freezing to death, those poor animals, you know. And some good farmers help them to survive sometimes by taking them hay and different things. But the animals in the wild really live a pretty rough life. We think they're just happy to be free out there, but to them it's kill or be killed, or do everything they can to survive. And then we have these big forest fires that burn the smithereens out of a bunch of them. And there's a lot humanity can do to make the animals more comfortable and their lives a lot better as time goes on. And DK points out that the time will come when we will be seen as the saviors of the animal kingdom, as well as the other kingdoms of the earth. We will learn to have sustainable farming, reproduction, where we can have all the things we need to eat without destroying ourselves with chemicals and mercury and different things like that. But okay. He says, later, the thought of service and of self will be found inadequate, and a more suitable form of expression will be found. But this suffices for the present. So he tells us that, you know, we're the person taking this course should have basically graduated from Sunday school and be ready for his next step. And this next step will be becoming one with the soul and thinking of himself as a servant of humanity. But he says later, he says this will even become inadequate. So in other words, the first step will be to just become a decent person, as we're taught in Sunday school. Second step will be to become a useful servant of self and humanity. But he says this will be found inadequate, and a more suitable form of expression will be found. Now, he doesn't tell us what that is, but it's interesting to speculate. What will be our next step after we go through this class we're in right now, and we lose ourselves in service to humanity? What's next? Looking at it like this. Yeah.
I was going to say, maybe we'll be creators. We'll make
Right.
a step further and start creating.
Well, yeah, I think you're headed the right direction there. In other words, I think the next step will involve will, because will is connected with the first ray and with the highest energy. So service is motivated through love. Love wisdom is the second aspect. The highest aspect is willpower purpose. So I would guess the next great step will be we will attain a tremendous power of will. We'll become creators, like you say there, and we will learn to manifest things very quickly through the power of our will. And the Tibetan talks about this. He also talks quite a bit about purpose itself, that behind purpose is a kind of principles that's beyond the comprehension of average man or even many disciples. And so purpose energy is very interesting. And I did quite a bit of contemplation on that and received some inspiration on it. And when I received this flash of inspiration, I saw the depth of what purpose really is that he was talking about. And it's basically this, is that there is a plan, and the plan is created by purpose. And when you tune in to the plan and see the purpose, that purpose is something that can manifest and nothing can stop it from manifesting. The only thing the only equation in the whole thing is time. How long it will take is the only unknown, but it will manifest. When you tune into the purpose and get a piece of it, then you can participate in something that is 100% sure will happen. And it's the basic principle behind faith as taught by the Christ. Because faith is visualizing something in your mind and then bringing it down into physical reality, if it is built on true principles. If it's not built on true principles, then it will not manifest. Okay? Any other comments or questions before we move ahead there?
JJ, do you hear me?
Yeah.
JJ? I suppose it will be something to do with this will purpose. It will be something to do with the whole planet and its relation to the solar system, the whole solar system, the other planets and the whole solar system. Something with this with the relations between this planet and the rest of the solar system.
Right. Well, yeah, by the time we, humanity, tunes into what purpose is, we'll probably have interplanetary communication of some kind, or interstellar. And we'll probably have communication, interstellar communication, before we have interstellar travel. And then, of course, there's other life forms on the other planets that we're unaware of that are not human like we are, but take different forms. Okay, this thought form of the plan, he says, manifests in 3 stages. He says the first stage is a period wherein the aspirant struggles to hear the voice of the silence. The voice reveals to him through symbol and life experience the purposes and plans with which he may cooperate. So in other words, he says that if you tune in, you can find out what your part of the plan is that will be revealed through symbol and life experiences. When you try to reveal in what you're supposed to do, rarely will you hear a voice saying, Nick, this is God, and you are supposed to run naked through the streets, or something like that, you know, or you are supposed to read this certain book, or you are supposed to run for president, or something like this. Very seldom does it come like that, though once in a while you may hear a voice. But normally it comes through different ways, and the most elementary way it comes, he says, will be through examination of your life experiences. Okay, your life experiences give you messages. And so this is why we talked last time about the principle of review, how it's important to review the last 10 years. Review the last 10 years and see your life experiences. And your life experiences are clues about what you're supposed to do and what your mission is. Each one of you has a mission in life. Relina, do you feel like you were born with a mission? Are you still on mute, Relina?
Yeah, in my younger years, I had more to do with bringing a family and into the world and teaching them, and now that they are older and involved with doing the same themselves, now I feel like I'm moving into a period where now it's got to be more for mankind and not just to create a family that has been fairly successful, I guess you could say.
Yeah, yeah. Mindy, how about you? Did you feel like you were born with a mission?
At times I have, and at times I'm just totally clueless.
One thing I like about you, you're totally honest.
Yeah, sometimes I think I know what I'm doing, and then I change my mind.
Well, that's kind of normal. But when you were, let's go back to when you were young. Did you feel like, have a feeling that there was something you were supposed to do?
When I was a child, all my focus was on telepathy.
Really?
I spent hours out in fields trying to communicate with the animals and the plants.
Well, then maybe that was part of your mission about what you're supposed to accomplish.
I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. Joshua, welcome. I'm glad you were able to make the latter part here.
Hey, thanks.
Were you? How about you? Did you have you felt throughout your life that you've had something you're supposed to find out about yourself that you're supposed to do?
Throughout my life, no. But after being in Subud over time, I got sort of impressions about something I'm supposed to do and stuff after that.
Okay. What made the turning point for you?
Well, I think it was from doing Latihan. I started to be
doing what?
Latihan.
What in the world's that?
That's it's a little hard to explain, but it's from an Indonesian word which means training. And so the understanding is it's the training of your soul by the power of God directly. And that's the name of the practice in Subud. And so after doing that for a while, I started to get like impressions about past lives and other things for myself. And that's when I got some information about some of the stuff I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
But it wasn't all at once, over time.
How about when you were younger, like 18 or so? Were you just kind of drifting, or did you kind of feel like you had a purpose, or what?
Well, I guess there was one thing when I was really well, not really young, but when I was younger, I liked I always liked like fantasy stuff, like Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of thing, stuff with that kind of setting. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a wizard. And I prayed to God that he would make me a wizard. And then I just, I guess because the world kind of doesn't accept that magic is real and all that kind of stuff, that I kind of just put it on the side. And then Nick over there was reading this book by Colin Wilson called The Occult. And he was like, I'm reading this book. And I was like, great, magic is real. All right, dream back on being a wizard.
I'll be darned. Okay. Well, anyway, all of us at one point in our life got, I think just about everybody here has got the impression that, yeah, you know, there's something I'm supposed to do. Let me just find out. And like I said earlier, when you are going in that direction that you're supposed to go in to fulfill your small portion of the plan, you'll feel like the wind's at your back. It'll just feel right. So if you're going in a direction that feels right to you, well, keep going in that direction. Okay, these will express themselves, he says, in the already materialized plans taking group form on the physical plane, with which he may cooperate and whose interest he may submerge with his own. So in other words, when you get a portion of the plan that you're supposed to be participating with, it will usually involve some type of group activity. It will either be an established group, a group in formation, or a group that you create yourself. So, but it will be some type of group activity because the soul is group consciousness. And everything the soul does is with promoting more group consciousness and interplay. And this must have a tremendous part in the great plan of which we're participating, is getting us toward the point where we're group conscious and concerned with the creation and sustainability of the group more than just the individual. We've learned in some basic Sunday school lessons the individual and what we're supposed to do as an individual. Now we're moving up to group consciousness as our next major step. Then he says that part of the plan, he's supposed to participate in that part of the plan which is his privilege to bring into manifestation and thus cause to materialize as a group he assists or creates. Okay, now then he goes into the second thing which he says is important as far as manifesting the plan. He says he enters the period wherein he learns to clearly hear and interpret the inner voice and broods reflectively on the imparted message. During this period, the energy circulates between soul and personality. So he finally gets to the first 3 words of Rule 3, the energy circulates. And it's funny, you might read a couple of pages and he may not be seemingly discussing the rule, but he finally gets to the core of the first 3 words. The energy circulates. And the energy circulates refers to the circulation of energy between the soul and the personality. Yeah, this energy circulating. The energy travels along a thread we call the Sutratma and sets up a vibratory response between the brain and the soul. And the spinal column is the symbol and corresponds to the 3 energies of the Sutratma. These 3 energies that circulate in the spinal column are called the Ida, which is the negative, the Pingala, which is the positive, and then the Shushuma, which is the central channel. So we have the positive and negative, and he says that's circulating through the life thread. And the life thread manifests on the physical plane through our actual spine. And in our spine, we have 3 columns with energy going up and down. And he says these energies are out of balance in all of us, or up to a certain time. And one energy is sending, one receiving, one male, one female, one negative, one positive, so to speak. And with the 2 energies, we're all polarized one or the other. If we're born in the male, we got more natural energy on the male side. If we're born female, we got more female energy, and within us we have both these energies going up and down the spine, and one will be polarized more than the other. So what the disciple has to do is balance these, so the two flows of energies are the same. And when he gets them in balance, where the two flow of energies is the same, then the energy can flow up the middle column, and the Shishama, and it flows up there, and you have a link between the soul and the personality established, he says. So that's pretty interesting. The negative channel is the emotion, and the positive channel is the mind. And he says, he points out that both of them distort. Now, I've talked a lot about how the emotions distort, but how does the mind distort? What do you think, Joshua?
Well, it's something less than the true eternal reality, so it would, by definition, distort that. But
Yeah.
I guess in practical terms, you know, logic's only as good as the amount of facts you have available to input to it.
Right, that's all true. He says the mind distorts with ego and ambition. In other words, we're really ambitious, and our mind calculates as to how to get us ahead. And in calculating how to get us ahead, it takes us away from the soul quite often, because to get ahead, you have to think with somewhat of a me first, selfish attitude, which is fine in a certain state of evolution, but when the person is approaching soul contact, he needs to think beyond that. And so we have distortion coming from the emotions and the mind. What's the main distortion coming from the emotions? Let's see, who can we pick on? Troy, do you have audio? I'll count to 3. Okay, who haven't we picked on?
I'm here, JJ.
Oh, good. We got you. Good.
Sorry, I was talking to my daughter.
Okay, how do the emotions distort reality?
They color our perception in a way that let's see, how can I explain this? When we are feeling with our emotional body, it gets in the way of our mental body maintaining control. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so as we feel, I'm not saying feelings are bad, they just need to be used correctly and used wisely. And if we allow our emotions to rule us, so to speak, then we tend to make wild and irrational decisions. And so our emotions color our perceptions in a way that doesn't allow our mind to help us understand reality. Does that make sense?
Let's look at our last 2 presidents, Trump and Obama, both very polarizing. Do you think emotions color how people feel about those 2 men?
Oh, absolutely. Emotions color virtually everything in politics.
Yeah, how many people do you think can actually see those 2 men the way they really are?
2 to 5% of the population, if that.
Probably not very many.
That high, really?
So, yeah, it's interesting how the emotions color things so much. They turn everything upside down, wrong side out. And
right.
Have you ever approached somebody who's very angry over something, and you told them, and you see that there's really nothing to be angry about, and so you tell them, hey, it's nothing to be angry about? How does such a person respond when you say that to them?
They get angry at you.
Get even angry.
I take shelter.
Right, right. You'd have to take shelter. That's a good point, Asaf. Yeah. Well, Annie is a really good example of somebody that's in charge of the emotional plane. But I bet Annie, are you there? Where did she go? Oh, she must have had to go. Or did
I'm
she? Oh no,
here.
there you are. Oh, okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm just standing right next to sometimes
Right,
because of
right.
my cats.
I've never seen you get overly emotional, but I bet you've had to deal with a lot of emotional people, though, haven't you?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, when I was in Ukraine, I think that was really a test for me because I had this woman in the EU delegation, and she was known for her screaming at people. And she would, I was completely new to this work, and the guy who was supposed to help me, he died 2 days after he left the Ukraine, so I was on my own, and I had to learn everything from scratch, so to speak. And this woman, she wasn't very helpful at all. She was just calling me and screaming at me in the phone. And I had to decide, I'm not going to let her touch me. I had to just stay in myself. So I did that for 8 months. And in the end, she gave, I think, the best compliment she could when I heard her telling somebody else, oh, sometimes I have such a bad temper and I'm just screaming at Annie, and she's so kind. She never screams back. I really appreciate that.
Well, that's a good compliment, Annie. That's great that you live your life that you can receive something like that.
I'm not always like that, but I'm trying.
Yeah, I noticed we're over time here. I didn't realize how fast time went today, but let me sum up this one point we're making is we have the male side centered on the mind, and it distorts with ego and ambition, with a female side centered on the emotion with, now these are both energies within each one of us, with emotions which distort, turn reality upside down, exaggerate. And so we have these two energies with their flaws going up and down our spine and within us. And the disciple has to balance these off so they are not in competition with each other, and they cooperate and they do not distort. And when he does this, then the life flow is centered in the central channel called the Shushumna, and it links the soul and the personality. So very simple, brief explanation of how to achieve full soul contact is just balance the male, female energies within you so they do not distort and they work in harmony, and boom, soul contact will be yours. Okay, any questions or comments before we end the class here?
I suspect that when a person gets increasingly more of the plan,
yeah,
that they tend to come back, reincarnate on a faster, like rapid fire. Like the average human might come back every 1,000 years, but if you're caught up in this whole process of forming groups and communities and molecules now, you're probably going to come back more like every 100 years instead.
Yeah, it'll depend. Like as you progress up the ladder, you're given the choice. Some entities move on to other type of work and don't come back for a long time, if ever, and others